So I'm going to talk very briefly about the future of energy storage in buildings and the role that I think homes and buildings can play in net zero. I think it's a really exciting time for our industry. Like, we've got a really ambitious target to get to clean power within just 5 years. And I think that homes can play a really, really big part in that. And that means everyone's home on this call. So I think that it was really interesting. I agreed to do this talk last minute. Our CEO couldn't make it. And Samantha, our marketing person, used AI to write this summary of what I was going to talk about. And I only found out yesterday it was AI. So and it's amazing that ChatGPT can write something that vaguely makes sense, something which I'm not always able to do. But let me simplify what we're going to talk about. So I'm going to talk about the electricity in the next 4.5 years, which the government's calling the Clean Power Plan, and provide some context about why we should care about that. I'm then going to talk about what roles I think low carbon homes with energy storage can play in clean power, which is a lot bigger than people might think. And also, I work for GivEnergy, as I'll explain in a moment. So I'm going to explain about their role as a platform to enable that to happen. Just a bit about me. I'm an independent energy consultant. I run a small consulting business called Future Zero Consulting. We've done clean power plans for regions in New Zealand. I help a energy access business and charity in Kenya, and also consult to GivEnergy. GivEnergy are the largest battery supplier in the UK, and I think they've got about 100,000 batteries in homes around the UK at the moment. Really thought-leading company. I also am a visiting professor at Durham University within their Energy Institute and School of Engineering, where I did my PhD on business and engineering coming together. And I've done about $200 million, I think, of low carbon projects around the world. My favorite one is on a volcano sticking out the middle of the Pacific, part of Tonga, which I really enjoyed. Please also feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you've got any questions that you don't feel comfortable raising now, or things you want to talk about in the future. So Clean Power 2030, and in the context of today's presentation, this will be really important, is the plan to get Britain to have low carbon electricity within 5 years. It's a really, really ambitious target. It's the cornerstone, one of the cornerstones of the Labour Party's agenda for this Parliament. It's led by Ed Miliband, but importantly, it's got support from someone called Chris Stark, who leads what they call Mission Zero, which is the mission to get this done, and other people, including Fintan Sly, who I met last week, who's head of the National Grid. And what Labour have said they will do is they'll get Britain from about 50% of its electricity today coming from clean power to 95% of it coming from clean power. So that means nuclear, wind, and a little bit of solar. And it's a really, really massive change. To deliver the plan, I think Labour have to deliver as much wind turbines in the next 4 years as we have over the last 10, and they need to get those under construction within the next 18 months. It's a really, really ambitious target, and it's going to be really, really exciting to see it happen. Just some context for you though. How does Britain get its electricity today? And there's a lot of, if you excuse my swearing, a lot of bullshit in the industry about where it gets its power, but this is actual measured data over the last 12 months. And over the last 12 months, about 30% of our electricity has come from gas power stations, and they're the power stations that decide how much we pay for electricity. We get a little bit less than that from wind, mostly, well, a mix of offshore wind turbines, some of which are the height of the shaft, 15% of electricity from nuclear power stations. But importantly, in the next 2 years, I'm going to turn my video off because my connection's a bit unstable. Importantly, over the next 5 years, a lot of the nuclear power stations are going to go offline. So we've got to replace those with other low carbon sources. We get a little bit from solar, about 5%, about 9% of electricity comes from biomass, which is the dirtiest power station on the grid, burning wood imported from North America, and it isn't clean. So we've got a pretty big mission to get most of this biomass and pretty much all of the gas off the system in 5 years. So how specifically are we going to do that? So Labour were obviously elected in May, and the first thing they did, they went out in November to the National Grid and said, tell us how to get to net zero. It was a consultation-led process. NESO reported back very quickly. In December, the government confirmed its support for that, and now we're on this big journey to obviously get to low carbon power. And it's a really, really evidence-based plan, but also really importantly, it was delivered very, very quickly. And I think that's led to some issues with delivery. And how the government's planning on doing that. This table on the left summarizes that really, really well. So they want to see us increasing from 15 gigawatts of offshore wind to almost tripling that to 50 gigawatts of offshore wind. So a lot of this will be in the North Sea and some in the Celtic Sea. There'll be a rough doubling of onshore wind. So these are turbines in the fields around our homes, and you'll have seen that we're now allowed to do that in England again. And there's a big boost for solar as well. But this mostly means solar farms. It doesn't mean solar on your homes. The other thing that's really important, makes a lot of press, is the government want to build, or they want National Grid to build new power lines. And the strategy for this is shown really well from this map on the right-hand side of the page. And you'll see these orangey lines going around into the North Sea and back. And the National Grid's plan is to build these offshore networks. One, to connect into the wind farms that are going to be built in the North Sea or expanded in the North Sea, but also to avoid having to get planning permission for all of that, to build new power lines from all the way from Scotland to England. It's quite an interesting move. It's probably quite clever from a planning perspective. I don't know if you saw today the Thames Tunnel's been approved, and that's been 16 years of planning. So there's probably no way they could build infrastructure onshore. But this is a huge investment in cables and all the materials that go into them. And a lot of people are getting really worried that that's totally undeliverable. Really, really hard to procure those cables, procure them affordably, build them, and keep them secure. And that's why when you listen to the people involved, the head of, that's why they say this is so difficult. So Finton said, he always says this, it's a Herculean task. That's at the outer limit of what is achievable. They really are positioning the plan to get to clean power as a moonshot. And that's probably correct. And Chris Stark, who's a very credible evidence-based scientist, really, who's leading this within government, said basically we have to do absolutely everything towards this from day one if we're going to pull it off. I'm now probably going to share some opinions of what I think should happen, because I think there's a massive, massive flaw in this plan. There's two actually, and I'll go through them first now. So firstly, Labour did promise to reduce each and every one of our bills by £200 a year. So that's written on their manifesto. They're going to take £200 a typical energy bill. But actually, if you look at the Clean Power Plan and the advice from NESO, is it will actually marginally increase the cost of electricity. And that's because of general inflation and funding some of the upgrades to the network. So Labour have got a real problem here that they've promised to deliver clean power. They put a plan in place to do it, but they're not going to see the benefits. And to Andrew's point earlier, we're in a really, really human problem here. It's not a technical solution to get to net zero. It's not a financial one. It's how will the public accept this? And that's where I think the role of low carbon homes with solar and batteries come into play. So I just want to give you some context. And I've been working on this for about 15 years. And I've written the standard that works out how much electricity any home with solar will have in the UK. So there's a general feeling that at least 7 million homes in the UK are suitable for solar. And I'm sure there's people on the call it won't work for their home, but I'm sure equally there's more people on the call who think it will work for them. And there's actually some analysts think that up to 18 million homes in the UK are suitable for solar. The average UK home with solar and battery storage will have a 70% lower electricity bill as a result of that technology. And that's despite the fact that we have dark winters, all of the electricity we get so the impact of solar is from early March till probably the end of October. It's a 70% lower electricity bill. And actually, if you have a heat pump and you're producing some of your hot water from solar, your saving can be at least £750 a year. I want to reinforce that as a lived experience for myself, and an evidence base I've seen through the Give fleet. However, despite this being a really good opportunity, despite there being really good paybacks, really good subsidies, just 1.7 million UK homes have adopted this technology. And that's a real problem that we're trying to solve at Give. And I'll talk about that towards the end of the talk, but it's about this accessibility piece. And in the context of energy storage, I just want to reinforce that buildings have got such a key role to play in the sort of storing and using of renewable power going forward. So it's likely that by 2050, electric vehicles which have giant batteries in them, really, really big batteries that are in effect subsidized by the car owner, will consume 15 to 20% of our electricity and provide 70% of the flexibility in our homes, the 70% of the ability to buy power when it's cheap, buy power when it's windy, and store it in batteries. Home batteries today should last 15 years. Battery technology is advancing so quickly. There's very few things that have more investment in them, and are a really, really good investment. Hot water tanks are also a really important form of energy storage. So, my hot water tank, it can store up to 10 kilowatt hours of heat. I can provide that, store that from a solar array, and heat our homes a bit cheaper. And also importantly, the fabric of our building. So you have a well-insulated home is a form of storage. And we'll put kilowatt hours of heat into our home. Yes, that leaks out through our insulation, but it's also an important buffer if we're trying to store things in our home. And homes, from a grid perspective, are really, really important, and batteries in our homes. So those batteries that we have in our houses or the storage in our water tanks are actually helping not just us as homeowners, they're helping the entire grid. They're totally unique in that. So a battery in your home can charge up from wind farms when it's windy and push that out to the grid when gas power stations are running, which helps reduce wholesale prices for electricity. The batteries in our homes can help back up the grid. If the grid is suddenly short of power, an interconnector fails, a power line goes down, we can help and be paid to support the grid and keep it running in a reliable and stable manner. And also, storage reduces the amount of grid that needs to be built. I know there's someone from a DNO on the call who's probably got a lot to say about this. I've been working with a DNO in New Zealand, as a network operator in New Zealand, who think that storage in homes can help them reduce the amount that they need to invest, or the pace that they need to invest in the grid to make it fit for 2035 in their case. And my PhD found there's £1 billion of savings alone just in the last mile of the grid if people can start adopting batteries. There's a huge amount of money available or being spent that batteries and storage in homes can help with. And I really think that National Grid should turn to homes in that clean power plan. I think Ed Miliband should, because he's promised to do so. And I think that Chris Stark and Fintan need to be really, really thinking about homes. And through my role at the University of Durham University, I run a digital twin of the UK grid. And that looks at different scenarios of how we might meet our electricity demand going forward. And according to that, I've done some work with the Global Solar Council. If imagine we can get to 5 million solar homes by 2030. So that's a roughly trebling of the amount of solar homes, slightly less than that, way less ambitious than the offshore wind target. They'll provide more electricity per year than a nuclear power station to the national grid. The batteries in those homes can meet 12% of our peak demand for 2 hours. So that's shaving all that peak demand, keeping some of the gas power stations offline. I think they'll tangibly, and I mean in people's pockets, reduce national energy bills by £7 billion a year. That's energy that that reduces our spend that's going into the economy for other use. And obviously, if we can ultimately switch off gas, I think, as Andrew says, we get a much lower reduction in national gas demand. Just more thinking about strategically as an economy, I think that we can create jobs in every town by deploying solar in every and batteries in 5 million homes. I think it's consumer led, which I think is really important. It won't be for everyone, but I think it can be for a lot of people. And I think there's also ways of delivering this at zero cost to the public purse. So ways of allowing people to subscribe to this technology rather than buying it up front. Argument. And if you compare the national grid scenarios to one with 5 million solar homes, you get much cheaper power, you get greener power, you get more time to deliver it, and a much better societal outcome. So I'll just talk briefly about GivEnergy technology in this. I think then there's some time for some questions if you'd like. Hard questions are okay, I don't mind, and I don't mind being challenged on what I'm thinking. So GivEnergy are really operating in the space of the smart grid of today. We install batteries in homes. We've got inverters that can respond to changes in the national grid. We can integrate with solar panels. We've got electric vehicle charging, and we're developing the ability to manage smart appliances in your home. So for example, you might say, I'd like my washing machine to go on when it's cheapest during the day, and off you go to work and the washing machine will work itself out, that kind of technology. Really helping the home become something that interfaces with the grid rather than just being a consumer of power. And I find the word "we're all consumers" really jarring. Actually, in the future, our homes could be something that's really actively involved with the electricity grid. And just how that plays out, our hardware and software platform can operate with our EV chargers and batteries and inverters, but importantly, led by Octopus and an institute in the US called Project Mercury. There'll be standards that let us operate with the hot water control and the heat pump control in the home. We're getting to a point very quickly where we'll be able to manage all the energy devices in our home, firstly for the consumer to keep their bills lower, but also for the grid to keep the grid green and keep the costs of the wholesale price down. So just in closing there, I think the UK government has got its targets to get to clean power by 2030. I think that's really important. I think it's a really good mission, but it's not going to tangibly reduce bills or energy poverty. And I'd remind you that thousands of people in the UK do die each year with energy poverty as a result of energy poverty. I think solar and storage on homes or storage on its own is one way of tangibly reducing bills, with the caveat about increasing access to them. So helping the energy poor access this technology when they can't afford it is going to be really important. And I think also it can really de-risk the delivery of a clean, lower cost grid and directly reduce bills. That's all I wanted to say this morning. I think we've probably got time for some questions, and I hope you're all there. But yeah, over to you, Jordan, I think.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for that session. And I appreciate you sticking with us, even though you had some unstable connection. But thankfully, we heard that entire presentation. And it was really good. Thank you. Actually, what I find really interesting is where you said, having 5 million homes across the UK that would have solar would be really useful. And I guess one of the things that the government could do with that is mandate them on new builds. Weirdly, up in Scotland, they had not technically a mandate, but de facto a mandate, because you saw basically every new build in Scotland install them because they had to meet certain efficiency standards. And I think that's now changing now that they're looking at removing that in their updated standards. Do you think that that's the kind of policy in terms of mandating them? That's the kind of policy that we need to ensure that we grow solar, and also maybe mandating storage. That's the other thing that people always forget, that yes, solar and storage are great together, but actually storage on its own is also a viable choice, especially people who have tariffs like Intelligent Octopus, where they can charge their battery up overnight and use that during the day to sort of lessen the load on the grid. Do you think that that's what the government should be pushing towards in terms of policy?
Um, well, I think there's two things you've asked there. I think it is important to see solar on new build homes. And
Mm,
for context for the audience, a solar panel now is about £60. We pay, some people paying £10,000 to have 14 of them on the roof, but the panel itself, £60. And new build, to get that on a new build home while the scaffolding's up, the electricians there should be really, really cheap. So I think it's a really, really good thing for new build homes to have them. That being said, it's not going to touch any of the existing 27 million homes that we have in the
yeah.
country and the 18 million that should be able to get this technology. And so, yes, to new build homes, I think that's a good thing, but we need to find a way of enabling this technology on existing properties and reducing the environmental and impact of those buildings and the cost of running those buildings. And my view is that the government should be putting in very, very low cost finance so people can access this technology on their existing homes. So you can get it super cheap at a very low cost rate that you know is going to save you money each year. And we're at a tipping point now where that happens. That's possible, I think. For context, I used to work for a business in New Zealand that did 15,000 batteries in the country. It did 80% of all the batteries. And the model there was no money up front. You paid it off every month. And the business was really, really successful at getting solar in New Zealand. It had some other issues associated with it, which people can Google. But I think the most important thing the government needs to solve is access to this technology on existing homes, for me.
I think like that's one of the issues that I found, because personally I want solar and storage, but the cost,
Yeah.
and even when they do have financing, because with interest rates the way they are now, it's actually quite a lot to finance. So I think like the quotes that I've seen have been somewhere in the region of like 10, 11, 12,000 for some solar panels and
You
energy
shouldn't be
storage on
paying
my
that.
house. Yeah,
You
exactly.
shouldn't be paying that much. That's someone ripping you off. Like,
Yeah,
or
and
that's not fair ripping you off. Someone profits making a big margin on that. Yeah.
yes, and that's exactly my thought process in terms of there seems to just be people making a lot of money now because people have rising energy bills. So they're either one making a lot of money on installation costs, or two just putting margins on everything.
Yeah.
And I think the big issue as well in terms of financing is when these companies do financing, there are high interest rates. Or if they do 0% interest, which is obviously what we all want, because none of us want to spend on interest, especially when there's margin already built into the installation. Um, it's always over like a 12-month period, and the only people who can really afford that are those who probably could have afforded to pay up front anyway.
Exactly. That's right.
Um,
We need long-term, low-cost finance to fund this. I've actually loaded up my Excel model of this. But if the government can bring in low-cost finance, then the average home, I think, will save 25% a year on their bill, including the cost of the finance. So if you are able to both reduce their bill by say £90 and do a £70 subscription, then they are £20 a month better off. And I
yeah,
think that's entirely possible. We've got to get away from this subsidy regime, which has created boom bust. We need to get in a position of stability and easy access for those who need an immediate reduction in their outgoings. And I think that's very, very possible.
I
Yeah.
think the other difficult decision when it comes to energy storage, especially, is choosing the array of technologies that are out there. It's a real minefield. Like there's so many different options, and they all do different things. And I think like the public awareness of like what you need.
Yeah.
I think the big thing for me is I have a friend who's recently installing solar and energy storage, and the big thing for him was he wanted something that could ensure that it was running his hot tub, EV. So then you're talking about quite a large inverter, and he wanted an all-in-one battery. And the problem is there aren't actually that many batteries that have high-powered inverters. I think the only option he had at the time was the Powerwall.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people just don't know where to begin. And often when you approach companies like Octopus Energy, for instance, they install for residential. They sort of have their preferred technologies that they recommend. Because he approached them and they were like, "Oh yeah, it'll be fine. You don't need a big inverter. You'll never use it." And it's like, "But I will, because I've got all this." So it's also part of that public education campaign in terms of knowing what you need. And do you think the industry can do more to actually be a bit more transparent rather than just selling whatever you make the most margin on?
Yeah, well, definitely. I think MCS. So MCS is the body set up to provide standards. I think there's a lot of things it's done well, and I don't want to be critical of, I'm going to say something critical of them, but I've got a lot of respect for them. I think they've got a really much bigger role to play in standardizing the way that this is sold to consumers. I think they've done some of that, but not all of it. I think also it's worth saying that we are at a point of commoditizing. Like within the next few years, batteries will become a commodity. They won't be very bespoke or special. A bit like solar panels now. Like actually panels, yeah, they're getting a little bit better each year, but a black panel is a black solar panel now. So I think so. Yes, you will see, I think, standardization over the next few years. And if you look at the next batteries, so generation 4s coming out, you'll see that. But also, I think there is a role for standardizing the way we sell this, which is really, really important. And it provides consumer protection. That's why I wrote that standard for MCS 8 years ago now, I think, was just trying to protect consumers with a very uniform saving estimate. So yeah, there's more to be done in that area, but convincing someone to pay a small amount of consulting fee to get that done is really hard.
Definitely. And I think one of the worries as well that I have, because obviously I see how rapidly this industry is changing at the moment. It's one of those that the battery I install now, it's going to be well, not obsolete, but there's going to be better technology.
But that's right. But you could wait 3 years for the best battery, but then you've had 3 years not saving from it. And batteries now are very, very good. Like you'll get a 10-year warranty for a battery, but it should last 15 years. And so yes, the industry's got to catch up and give people that assurance. But the reality is the products on the market are really, really good now, and the cost down on them is pretty incredible. So yeah, it's something I think everyone should be looking at if they can.
Yeah, I agree, and that's why I am still investigating myself. It's just a hard decision to make.
It is hard.
I think that's all the questions that I had, and unfortunately, no one from the audience had a question.
That's okay.
But I do appreciate the session, Andrew. I learned a lot. I'm sure other people did, and that's why they have no questions.
Okay,
but perfect.
Thank you,
Andrew.
Nice to meet you all.